kick off this first EPIC webinar. Welcome everyone on this webinar, which we titled Hate Speech, Understanding the Problem from Different Perspectives. We hope through this webinar to provide more information, practices, and ways to understand, collaborate, and build partnerships and coalitions as we help to tackle hate speech, both online and offline. And this is the first webinar, which is part of a series of webinars to be delivered throughout the EPIC project, for which Dolinda in a bit we're going to speak about it. My name is Ron Salai, and in the context of this webinar project, overall, I'm an external consultant for an organization called Adiele Zavidovici, which is part of the EPIC project consortium. And one of my main responsibilities, except supporting with the webinars, will be also to co-develop and deliver an international training course for the EPIC project partners that will happen, hopefully, if circumstances allow, in December 2020 in the city of Brescia. And now, with me today, I have two honored guests, Menno Ettema from the Anti-Discrimination Department of the Council of Europe, and Dariusz Krzemny, youth worker, activist, trainer, and consultant in Poland, and also working at the European level with anti-discrimination and human rights education. With me will be also Dolinda Cavallo, project manager of the EPIC project, and Patricia Martinez, who has been the main architect behind all the technicalities and promotion of the webinar. Last but not least, we're also very happy to welcome Jennifer Van Dist, project officer at the European Commission, DG Migration and Home Affairs. Now, given that in the audience, we have also external people who might not be familiar with the EPIC project, I would like, therefore, to pass over the mic to Dolinda to say a few words about the EPIC project, and then to Jennifer Van Dist for her welcoming remarks. Dolinda, over to you.
So thank you, Ron. Thank you all for joining us in this first webinar of the EPIC project. I will say just a few words to give a general picture of what is the EPIC project for those who still don't know it. So EPIC means European Platform of Integrating Cities, and it is funded by the European Union Asylum, Migration and Integration Fund. This project started in January 2020. And its aim is the creation of a network of local authorities and NGOs from different European countries that during a period of 3 years will share knowledge and best practices on third country national integration through the direct practical learning. So our partners will develop expertise in areas like housing, labor integration, integration policy, and counter narratives. On the one hand, by understanding how other partners carry out specific services on integration, and on the other hand, by showing them their best practices. So the idea behind this exchange is that the practices observed in other countries can be then replicated in the local communities back home with the creation of pilot projects. And the aim of this pilot project will be the improving of a specific integration services in each local authorities of the EPIC project. And at the same time, we are going to address the topic of management of information on migration and efficient ways to counter negative narratives with the international training on media that Ron was talking about a few minutes ago, and through webinars that will bring partners of the EPIC project to develop counter and alternative narrative campaign. So this is the first webinar, but more will follow. So in the end, we'll reach a network a network that also after the project will share good practices on integration. We will reach an improvement of services on the ground of each targeted local authorities, and a mindset change toward a more inclusive society. So now I leave the floor to Jennifer, the project officer of the EPIC project from the European Commission, DG Migration and Home Affairs.
I am the project officer following the EPIC projects from the operational point of view of the European Commission. So as Dolinda explained, the EPIC project is one of the 8 projects selected following the call for proposals 2018 to finance transnational projects, setting up networks of cities and regions to work together on integration. As Dolinda said, the project will allow transfer of knowledge and exchange of practices and experiences at local and regional level across member states. Hate speeches towards migrants are everywhere, and nowadays they are very easy to spread through social media and the online world. And we also know that this kind of speeches could have and has unfortunately had impact on the outcomes of elections in the member states. That's why a very important aspect of migrants integration is to establish a good communication strategy at local, regional, or even international level to highlight the benefits of local integration. This can be done by re-establishing the facts, communicating more about real life stories, highlighting what migrants and natives have in common rather than what makes them different. But this you all know, and you will probably talk a lot about that later. Finally, you might also know that the Commission is also funding 7 transnational projects, which are currently ongoing and which have been selected following the 2017 AMIF call for proposals, with the aim to raise awareness about the contribution of migrants to European societies. So I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to participate to this first webinar organized by my EPIC project. And I'm very looking forward to hearing all the opinions and ideas the experts will have to talk about today.
I would like now to welcome the first speaker, Menno Etema, who is Program Manager at the No Hate Speech and Anti-Discrimination Cooperation Unit at the Anti-Discrimination Department of the Council of Europe, and co-secretariat of a new interdisciplinary committee of experts on combating hate speech. In his function, Menno brings together the organization's work and combating hate speech and discrimination through standard settings, monitoring and capacity building programs in cooperation with European partners and member states. So Menno will try also to address one of the perspectives that we thought would be interesting for you, which is more the institutional perspective, that of the Council of Europe. So Menno, let's give it a try. So the turn is yours.
The Council of Europe is an intergovernmental organization in Europe that's mandated to promote democracy and protect human rights and the rule of law, in line with the European Convention on Human Rights. So the European Convention on Human Rights is basically the starting document, standards that we base our work on. In that sense, it's not the European Union. I would like to clarify that, even though the flag of the European Union in the bottom corner, the Council of Europe flag is in the top right. So there's 2 different organizations. So the Council of Europe starts from the European Convention, and the EU is started more from the economical cooperation. There are another few differences. Council of Europe has 47 member states, so it's larger. So as you can see from the map, it ranges from Iceland to the far end of the Russian Federation, or from the north, from Norway, all the way to the south in Turkey. So it's quite a broad scope. As for the Council of Europe, its institutions, I think very important one to know is the European Court of Human Rights, which upholds and judges the states upholding the European Convention and other related conventions. And then there's a wide range of other monitoring bodies that check that member states uphold human rights conventions and treaties, and I'll touch on a few of them today. When it comes to its governance, of course, you have the Committee of Ministers, which comprises of the Ministries of Foreign Affairs of the 47 member states. You also have the Parliamentary Assembly, so that's your national parliaments are represented in our governing bodies. And what I think is quite important in this setting, the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities. So also local and regional authorities are represented in the governance structures of the Council of Europe. And finally, you have the Council of Europe Secretariat, which is where my department belongs to, which is actually implementing and supporting the monitoring work of the organization. And we are based in Strasbourg, France. About the Anti-Discrimination Department, next slide. I summed up what our work is in this little sentence, but I'll come back to that in the end. I think to say about the Anti-Discrimination Department, I mean, its role is to support member states in combating discrimination, hate crime, and hate speech. And at the same time, fostering integration while protecting national minorities, regional and minority languages. We're basically working on standard settings, monitoring, and doing cooperation programs. So the 3 pillars of our work. And our cooperation programs are specifically building on the European Court's rulings and also the recommendations of its 3 monitoring bodies. And here it comes the European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance, which is a very important institute that checks national member states' compliance to and efforts to address discrimination and racism and intolerance. We have the Framework Convention on Protection of National Minorities and the European Charter of Regional Minority Languages. There are a few other guiding documents on, for example, sexual orientation, gender identity, and intercultural integration at local level that form part of our work. I think when you listen to this efforts, it's very clear that our efforts start from addressing the issues from the perspective of the persons it targets. So also when I'm talking today about hate speech, I very much start from the perspective of the persons that are targeted by the speech. But I would like to stress here that we believe that a comprehensive approach to addressing the needs of those who are targeted by discrimination, hate speech, and hate crime actually addresses the issues of everyone in society, all the concerns of the community. It's actually, one does not go without the other. And I'll come back to that a little bit more throughout my examples, how actually addressing the issues of those who are targeted or the victims, let's say, actually supports prosperity and the well-being of society as a whole, or a community as a whole. So that's our department, and that's from where I will be speaking today. Now let's have a look at this topic of hate speech, and also at the European level. Hate speech is a problem. As I mentioned, ECRI, European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance, monitors the situation of discrimination and also hate speech in its member states. And through it was identified that members of vulnerable groups lack understanding of their rights. So what are their rights actually that they deserve protecting, but also are reluctant to report hate speech and discrimination. This is particularly worrying if you take into account that the ECRI has also noticed in its annual report since 2016 that hate speech is increasing year over year. There is a lack of reporting, and 2, that still hate speech is increasing. So we can assume that it's even far worse than what we can document and report on. And I think this is one of the problems that we do have, is that due to the lack of data and a good understanding of what's going on and what are the problems and who are targeted and who are affected, lack the possibilities to actually engage and effectively address the issue. But I'll come back to that a little bit further down the line with some concrete examples of how in some member states they've tried to address this issue of lack of reporting. Now, when we're talking about hate speech, maybe we should go even one step back further. If we understand speech is a problem, actually understand hate speech, and this comes to definitions. How do we define hate speech? Now, if we go to the next slide, you will see a very comprehensive and complete definition. But I think I should warn you now that across Europe, at national level, there are many different definitions of hate speech, depending on, for example, if you look at the criminal code or other administrative codes. And across Europe, there's no common understanding. The Council of Europe has a definition of hate speech, and it's the only international organization that has one. And across the globe, there are many discussions on how to define hate speech. I'm going to use the ECRI definition, which is in the General Policy Recommendation number 15 on combating hate speech, which was published in 2016. And I'm using this one because for me, it's a very comprehensive, very complete understanding of hate speech. Criticism against this definition is that it's not very useful in criminal settings. And I think that is true. When you need to define a criminal setting, the criminal threshold is when is hate speech criminal, you need a very clearly defined, narrower definition. But I think for understanding the full scope of hate speech and its wider impact, I think this ECRI definition is very useful and very good for this discussion that we're having today. You probably already read it, but I'm still going to go through it very quickly because there's a few things I want to highlight. So it reads, the definition reads, the advocacy, promotion, or incitement in any form of the degradation, hatred, or vilification of a person or group of persons, as well as harassment, insults, negative stereotyping, and stigmatization or threats in respect of such a group of persons. And the justification of all the preceding types of expressions on the ground of race, color, descent, national or ethnic origin, age, disability, language, religion or belief, sex, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, sexual orientation, and other personal characteristics or status. Now, I highlighted a few points. So it's about the advocacy, promotion, and incitement that we about, but I think also justification is important. It's not only about advocating discrimination or advocating that one is more important than the other or more valued than the other, but it's also justification of such acts. And for example, justification of war crimes or genocide is one of those actions. It's not only about promoting genocide, but it's also justifying genocide, which is a form of hate speech, and that should be addressed. Of course, it's about any form, and this is very important when we also look at the online space, where expression can have many forms. Memes, videos, pictures can sometimes say more than 1,000 words, and such an expression clarifies why it says any form. And then you have persons or a group of persons in cursive. And I think this is also important. It's not only about an individual, an identifiable individual, but it's also a group of persons. And in that sense, it's important to reflect, for example, criticism of a religion maybe is possible in a public debate. Criticism or targeting or attacking believers of a certain religion, that becomes targeting a group of persons. And that is where we need to be more vigilant on what's actually being said and its impact. So there are distinctions here that we need to make. Of course, the definition finishes with all kinds of different grounds on which hate can be expressed. And I think the last sentence, other personal characteristics or statuses, gives the flexibility to also acknowledge local circumstances that maybe predict other grounds for hate speech, which are very real and should be taken into account. Now, about defining hate speech and how to address it, there's a few points in constant back. One of them is freedom of expression, and this is, of course, one of the fundamental human rights in Europe. And so I would like to dive more into the human rights framework in addressing hate speech, and that comes to the next slide. So let's look into this issue. What are the human rights considerations that we need to take into account when we address hate speech? I think here I will start from the European Convention on Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms, and of course the case law of the European Court of Human Rights. Of course, Article 10 is most quoted, freedom of expression and opinion. And I think it is a true concern that when we address hate speech, we should not limit this right or not impact too severely this right. But I think it's also important to mention here that Article 10 is not an absolute right, and restrictions may be applied as they are prescribed by law and necessary in a democratic society and proportionate to the legitimate aim, for example, national security, health, or protection of the rights of others. And I think in the context of COVID, for example, public health is an interesting example at point. Now, of course, for the courts, many times the question when somebody says, okay, my right to speech have been in part, people say it's hate speech, but I think it's freedom of expression, they go to the court. It's important to understand that the European Court of Human Rights, the way it works is you first go to the national court system and go through all the system at the national level. So national judges have to assess if speech is legitimate or criminal. And if you still disagree with the highest court in your national level, then you can apply to the European Court of Human Rights. And then they have a look at the in line with the European Convention. And I think that for a long time, the European Court has really looked at, okay, is limitation of the freedom of expression in this given case acceptable? Because if not, it would actually violate Article 17. which is prohibition of any acts or activities that destruct any of the rights and freedoms in the European Convention as such. So the speech is so strong that it actually undermines the values and the concept of the European Convention. I think that's the balance that was always trying to be made. And in doing so, they looked at a few indicators when they're going through the assessment, which is the next slide. And I think this is part of our thinking that we need to take along. Considerations regarding permissible, impermissible speech. So when the court looks at hate speech examples that are brought before it, it tries to do a kind of test. And I think we always need to do this when we are looking at cases in front of us and to determine our actions. One of the questions is the political and social context at the time of the speech was made. So what is the context where the hate speech took place, and what could be the consequences of that? In times of close to war or very violent situations or crisis, speech can have stronger impact than in more quiet situations. So these are questions to be answered. What's the social or political context at the time of the speech? We also need to look at the purpose of the speaker. What was the intent of the person when speaking? Was it really meant to be a joke, or was there more sinister intentions of the speaker? We also need to see the role and status in society of the speaker. It makes a huge difference if it's a school kid or if it's a national politician who uses such speech. Of course, we need to look at the content of the speech. Is it critical but still respectful? Is it a harassment or more violent speech? These are our concerns. So we need to look at the content and what's it actually calling for. Is it calling for action, and what kind of action, or implying action, etc., etc. We also need to look at the form of its dissemination. So does it have a wide reach or not? Or was it not intended to have a wide reach? An email is different than an online article. And of course, we need to look at the nature of the audience. Who receives the speech and how will they interpret it and act? So these kind of concepts are always taken into account when looking at an example of speech and to see if this is permissible or impermissible. And I think in this case, what the court also states is that it's very important that strong policies to combat racial discrimination are in place at national level. Because once it's clear at national level what is permissible and what isn't, what is racial discrimination, what isn't, it becomes also more clear to define what is hate speech and what will not be hate speech, and what will pass the criminal threshold or the test of criminal threshold and what doesn't. So this is again a call for why at national level it's so important to have a defined well discrimination, equality, and things like hate speech in the national criminal, administrative, and civil law. Now, in addition to this, it's not only the black and white Article 10 or not. I think there's a few other concerns, and this comes back to some of the other articles. I think here to stress that a recent series of judgments of the European Court of Human Rights has elaborated further on the responsibilities of national, and that includes, for example, local authorities, I think also in their work, on providing redress when hate speech occurs. Insulting expressions, they call it in the judgments. And I think here the court has said that the national that under Article 8, the right for respect for private and family life, the states have a positive obligation to provide effective redress and effective respect for the rights of private. In other words, member states, the governments need to secure that targets of hate speech have a way of addressing it effectively. And this, of course, also ties into Article 14, which is prohibition of discrimination, which basically means that anybody affected by hate speech needs to have a way of seeking redress and finding ways to seek redress and protection of their rights, as outlined in the European Convention on Human Rights. So I think we do need this issue of the framework of human rights as outlined in the European Convention as interpreted by the European Court of Human Rights. This is a nice theoretical framework, but of course the challenge is, how do you actually do this? How do you implement this? And here I would go back to ECRI and its general policy recommendation number 15, which is on the next slide. Because ECRI, based on its monitoring work that it's done over the past few years, has come up with quite a comprehensive recommendation which provides a lot of suggestions on what member states could do. And the underlying principle of its work is that we need to recognize the fundamental importance of freedom of expression, tolerance, and so it's all three elements that always need to be balanced with each other and keep in mind when deciding for addressing hate speech. Second, important to identify the conditions conducive to the use of hate speech and take appropriate measures to remove them. So these are really preventive measures. I'll come back to that in a second. The third point is that it's important to involve and secure the commitment of a wide range of private and non-governmental actors. So it's not only on the national or local authorities alone, it is really a multi-stakeholder approach that needs to build a comprehensive response to address hate speech. Now, what does such a comprehensive approach then cover? Next slide. It really goes from a starting point of raising awareness on the dangerous consequences of hate speech for society and for human rights. So that is where it starts. This is preventing, raising awareness, and also improving educational and media literacy among general population and targeted audiences. So this is making the population resilient against hate speech and securing stronger protection and pushback against hate speech when it occurs. It also calls, there's a few other points, but I'm just highlighting a few of the points in the recommendation, general policy recommendation. It's encourage speedy reaction by public figures against the use of hate speech. And I'll come with a few examples in a minute, but it's really important that public figures speak out against hate speech and for integration, inclusion of those who are targeted. Another point, which is very challenging, I think, in many contexts, is the withdrawal of financial or other forms of support for political parties, for example, that are actively using hate speech. This is a very contested point, but I think it's really a challenge in modern-day society. Also, the use of self-regulation. It's not only on criminal and administrative law, but also self-regulation can play an important role in the public and private institutions. Public institutions, ministries, municipalities, do you have in place procedures, self-regulatory procedures to address hate speech, and the same for private institutions. Internet companies like Facebook and others is of course a very clear example where self-regulation plays an important role to address hate speech. And then as a form of last resort is the criminalization of the most extreme manifestations while respecting freedom of expression. So this is really a moment of last resort, but we need to have a red line that if you cross that, we say, no, this is criminal and we will not stand. Now, this all sounds very great on paper, but how do you do this in practice? So I'll go to my final section of the presentation by putting a few examples from across Europe that we gained from the No Hate Speech movement and what we've done in Georgia specifically. The first one is this multi-stakeholder approach that I was talking about. And in this sense, I would like to, the multi-stakeholder approach for me is very much about inclusivity. And in this case, I would like to take the example from Ireland, where the National Youth Council, before launching their campaign, the No Hate Speech Movement Youth Campaign in Ireland, what they did is they brought together representatives from all corners of their society. So they had LGBT NGOs, Roma NGOs, Muslim NGOs, but also Christian NGOs, the Scouts, political NGOs, etc., etc. Of course, local city municipalities, ministries, etc., the Equality Council. And what they did, for example, was trying to define hate speech together. And this exercise was very interesting because it created a dialogue between them. Because when they first started, like, okay, hate speech that targets, and then the LGBT said sexual identity and gender identity and sexual orientation. And then the Muslims said, yes, but it's also Islamophobia or anti-Semitism. So it became a very, very, very long definition. But during this process, they really came to the understanding that hate speech targets everyone, and everybody can be targets of hate speech or could be the victim. So this actually created a strong understanding of solidarity in the need of addressing it. So, and they still benefited from this exercise because later on when they started to roll out the campaign, they, for example, on the International Women's Day, we had women from a Roma background and Muslim background speaking up about issues, how it affected them, sexist and sexist, how it affected Muslim women or Jewish women or Christian women or any other woman. So it was very diverse. So different people spoke about sexism and how it impacts them. And at the same time, we saw solidarity. So for example, around Islamophobic hate speech, we had Muslim and Roma organizations speaking out in support of their message and vice versa on other days. So this multi-stakeholder approach really created inclusivity, solidarity. And I think also it helped them to increase the outreach overall and learned from each other how to understand the issue and limit competition. And I think this was also very important. Together we can do more if we don't compete with each other. Another point is about data gathering, which is the next point. As I mentioned earlier, ECRI has found that there's lots of victims of discrimination and also hate speech do not report. And this is really undermining our possibilities to develop effective policies and to actually see the impact of the hate speech. And I want to share an example here from North Macedonia, which was very interesting. The Helsinki Committee for Human Rights of the Republic of Macedonia launched 2 interactive websites and apps. So on your phone, you could report hate crime, and they collected this data and then put it on an interactive map. So you could see weekly how different cases were popping up across North Macedonia. Now, and this was very interesting because it gave a better idea, because it was anonymous, of the scope of the issue, scope of the problem of hate crime and hate speech. But it also had educational value because the Helsinki Committee engaged with the reporter to actually check, okay, why is this a hate crime or a regular crime, and actually gave feedback to the general audience. Okay, this is hate crime, this is regular crime because, or this is hate speech, or this is permissible speech because. So they had an educational element to it. And it also created a channel of reporting because the Helsinki Committee followed up on all hate crime cases and also more severe forms of hate speech manifestations. And it provided suggestions to the users on where to report hate speech on social media platforms or local police or etc., depending on the situation. It really gave impetus to local authorities, to the police and other institutions to take action on the issues of hate speech based on the findings, and because it had the public awareness was raised. If it's criminal, you can go to the police, or you can go to the public defender's office or the Equality Council. If it's non-criminal, maybe an NGO, you go to Facebook or another social media platform. And it's very diverse and very complex. And actually, this is demotivating. People who are confronted with hate speech do not know anymore where to go and where to get support. And to remember, it's not always about to take criminal actions. Not everything has to go to court, but sometimes those who are targeted by hate speech need some understanding, need some solidarity, or need other ways of addressing the issue. Sometimes a little bit of mediation can already be very helpful. For example, the police in Norway, often when they got cases of hate speech, they never took it to make a criminal case out of it. They just went around to speak to whoever did the hate, actually discuss, okay, what are the consequences of your action and the impact on the victim. And that already, this mediating action already had a huge impact in reducing repetitive hate speech by that perpetrator. So there's many of these things that you can think of that actually provide redress, but you need to be clear on how to access such support mechanisms. And this is, I think, is lacking in many cases. And I think at the local level specifically, there's a lot of things to be done. And we did that in Georgia. I'll come back to that in a minute. Another point is education. Here you see 2 manuals from the No Hate Speech Movement campaign. Book, which is a basic manual to explain what is hate speech and how to address it, and work with young people to address increased understanding and also human rights impact understanding. And We Can is a manual to support people taking action by using counter alternative narratives. Now, Derek is going to talk much more about taking action and how that could look like, so I won't go too deep into the human rights education element, but I think what we've learned is that by working together, just joint actions, so joint trainings has been very useful. So we've seen very examples where, for example, minority groups and journalists were trained together on hate speech. And by doing so, they got a link, they got connected to each other. So when a hate incident happened, and the journalists were like, okay, how do I report on this attack on a Roma person? They actually reached out first with the Roma contacts that they had and said, okay, how do I write about this incident? Can I use the word gypsy, or can I say Roma person, or whatever? What's actually the wording that I choose? And this actually helped reduce re-victimization and stereotyping about an incident. So it's these kind of joint efforts and bringing coalitions and multi-stakeholder, again, this multi-stakeholder approach, which is very strong. And this brings me to the next point, which is standing by victims and addressing disinformation, rumors, and using of counter and alternative narratives. This is a clear example. We've seen, I think it's very important to really at the community level, an incident of hate crime and certainly also hate speech, such attacks can have a very long lasting and divisive impact on a community. Because basically the hate motive of the crime or the speech, it signals that a group within that community is not valued equally, or that are not even welcome. And this can have a long lasting impact in a community. So it's at this moment that authorities, a senior figure, needs to speak out and actually address the concerns of the groups that are targeted, and acknowledge that that group is a member of the community. So for example, what we've done in a few countries is train press officers from the Ministry of Justice and the Ministry of Interior on how to communicate when a hate incident occurs in a country. How do you communicate at that point? And also what words to choose, because we've seen so many examples it was good initiative, but the wording was so badly chosen that we re-victimized the targets and reinforce stereotypes, and that's what you don't want. So again, this cooperation with the targeted group or the minority groups is important. And it's also important, for example, when you introduce new equality laws or new policies, to actually prepare the wider community why such laws or policies are important. Why isn't a law against hate speech or a law for equality so important? And this is the other part of the medallion. You should, the coin, the other side of the point, you should not only address the concerns of those who are targeted, the wider community. The community needs to understand, needs to be given meaning to an incident. So this means that you as an authority need to give fair information about the incident. What happened? And what's the consequence of this? And then you need to communicate how you're going to address it. What's the why do you choose this redress? And these kind of steps lead to healing to take place. And it helps to dispel rumors and address misgivings that can linger on. One of the projects that we have is Cultural Cities. That's a 10-year program where cities are developing local project policies on integration. Integration of minority groups, refugees, etc. And one of their programs is the anti-rumor strategy. And this is clearly the case where they try to work with the community, have community meetings and gatherings, and actually to understand what are the misgivings between one group and the other group. How do they interpret incidents, and how can you further strengthen response in a time of crisis, or to avoid rumors to spread and to actually take hold in the community. I think a very interesting off-spin here is a new manual on community policing, which is plus for police, which was developed in Spain. And it really provides police officers tools to engage with the community and to address rumors that might be there. I think this comes back to what I was saying in the beginning, that by providing supportive and understanding surroundings and addressing the needs of the victims, you actually address the needs of the whole community. And by doing so, you really prevent escalations, you strengthen the resilience of the community, and you can work to prosperity and peace in the community. I'll conclude with a case example from Georgia, as I said, which I think illustrates this whole approach. So we are running now a 4-year program in Georgia called Fighting Discrimination, Hate Crime, and Hate. For us, it's very comprehensive. It's to strengthen the capacity of vulnerable groups to make full use of their rights and participate in society as a whole. And we're doing this by looking at the legislation. So we're looking at legislative review of the criminal, civil and administrative code, and regarding anti-discrimination, hate crime and hate speech. And this in line with Council of Europe standards. So this is really the legislative part to set clear red lines of what is acceptable and what isn't. In addition, we're supporting developing a mechanism for data collection. So data collection by the equality councils, NGOs, and specifically also the police, prosecutors' offices, and the courts, and to make sure that this all aligns so that you have better understanding of the scope of the problem, so you target your actions and develop new policies. In addition to this, once you have legislative review and new legislation, you need to, of course, train the professionals. So we're training police, we're training prosecutors, but also NGO partners into using these laws to address the issue. And finally, and this is the point I also want to stress, is raising awareness about human rights and anti-discrimination policy. So trying to sensitize the general population and particularly the vulnerable communities that are targeted about their rights and how to seek redress. Now, to zoom into the last point, we had, and because we are speaking here at the local level on what can be done, I wanted to give an example of what we've done in a few of the regions in Georgia. There's a vast diversity of minority groups living, communities living. So when the project started, we moved into these regions and we organized consultative meetings. And we organized these consultative meetings by involving the community, but also members of the municipalities, the Public Defender's Office, which is the National Equality Council, the Ministries of Justice, Ministry of Interior, etc., etc. So it was a wide group of people that had some role to play in addressing the issues. And what we made sure is that these consultative meetings were a mixture of engagement and fun and information. So we organized information lectures, but also theater plays, engaging fun activities, etc., etc., etc. So we had, and especially we made sure we listened. And I think this is very important. When we reach out to a community, it's also about listening and creating that space and safety to do so and take that on board. Now, this consultation led us to understand that there's overall a lack, the needs that we needed to address is to know your rights and to also increase the understanding of how to access redress and to understand accessible. For example, very many villages in these regions of Georgia don't have a local police officer. And where there is a police, there's not necessarily trust in the police. I mean, a woman or somebody from the LGBT community does not necessarily trust to go to the police. So for them, it's important to know that there are specialized units that they could reach and how to reach them. So there's a specialized unit that knows how to deal with sexual violence or domestic violence or LGBT-related crime. And people need to know that that's within the police, but also with the Ministry of Interior, so that they have specialized units. So how do you reach them? Ombuds office the same. They have a very important role to mediate and to take cases. And NGOs, of course, are often the first line of contact. And how do the NGOs then communicate with the police or other agencies? So this needed to be more clear. And this led also to understand that we need to think more about information materials. Are they accessible? What languages do we use? How do we distribute them? Online doesn't always work. So we have municipalities stepping in and hanging up banners with information in different languages, which also gives visibility to national minorities and their languages. So it's also, again, sending out as a community that everyone is part of the community. Everybody has right to know their rights and access to these redress mechanisms. But I think it was also very interesting to see how, for example, the police handing out information flyers in many different languages during the Equality Week that was done. So we had the police, who are sometimes mistrusted, actually reaching out and taking positive steps, which really helped the situation. Now, these are a very clear example where, and what I really liked is that we really tried to create a communication between minorities and the majority group. So we had human rights talks, for example, in the minorities, which were broadcasted live through Facebook, which were followed by many people in Tbilisi area, the capital where the majority lives. But then when we did activities in Tbilisi, we also made sure that it could be followed live in the minority communities in the regions in Georgia. So we created links between the regions and the capital and between regions where different minorities live so that they got to know each other better. And what I found very interesting is that they decided to not go for another campaign called No Hate Speech. They actually chose I Choose Equality. because this is a positive way of formulating. I choose. It's an active act, and everybody can choose it. And then what do I choose? Equality, because equality means that we can all equally take part. And I think this was positive messaging, really made this message stronger. Now, I would like to, this I think was a very inspiring example, and we're still reaping the benefits. And now that we have the COVID situation, I think we really see the benefit of having a strong connection in the communities and the involvement of municipalities and other national stakeholders and local stakeholders. Because when COVID broke out in Georgia, at some point, 2 or 3 weeks in, we had a confirmed case in an isolated community of about 200 people from a national minority in one of the regions. And what we saw quite soon afterwards is that the fact that this case was reported on, that case, there was a case in this national minority, sparked hate speech targeting this national community. There were calls for boycotting shops that were owned by members of this national community, or to boycott businesses that employed members of this community. So it was clear that from our campaign, we managed to mobilize NGOs and other actors to actually take a stand against this, and to actually clarify that by self-isolation, other people couldn't be affected, that in the case of COVID, we need to have solidarity and work together to address it, and that that the virus doesn't discriminate. So we really try to push back against these calls for boycotts with positive messaging. What we also did, for example, is that we rebranded our I Choose Equality campaign. So we used the campaign, but then we, for example, instead of doing all kinds of activities face-to-face, we did online activities. Among others, we started posting little memes and video messages with by well-known writers or actors who were suggesting different books to read, different films to watch while staying at home, or other activities that you could do at home. And all these films and reading suggestions were examples of Diversity Georgia. So a lot of this Georgian traditional cultural media that really celebrates diversity, because historically it's very important in Georgia. So we really try to emphasize the diversity, the strong richness of diversity in the community. At the same time, and for example, we organized this weekly human rights talks every week on Facebook Live now. We have 4,000 people following the human rights talk of 1 hour, hosted by the Ombuds Office, Deputy Ombuds Officer. And we invite activists, human rights activists, media people, but also famous film actors, etc., to speak about human rights and diversity and how to address COVID. For example, for journalists, how to report on COVID without emphasizing stereotypes or re-emphasizing stereotypes and things like that. In addition, I think this is also something we realized very quickly, because we had such feedback from the community members, is that information about protective mechanisms, protective measures on COVID were not available for national minorities, because it was not a national minority languages, or these minority languages have no access to internet, or very little, and all the information was online. There's a very good national website, but it's not accessible. So we straight away stepped in. We helped translate the key information into the national minorities, and I was very happy to see that municipalities and police officers started to hand out flyers and communicate in NGOs to actually send out information, what are protective mechanisms, and engage with the community to understand their needs. And we're working now with that, following up on that. I think these are very good examples, and I think we do need to think, and you need to also think, also in the context of this project, on the impact of COVID. I mean, we do see a lot of situations where the COVID is actually emphasizing or underlining existing discriminatory narratives, and they're slowly being recast following the COVID pandemic. And I think vulnerable groups are particularly hard hit by the COVID, not having access to services or support and things like that. And I think we really need to start preparing for a new wave of hate speech. Across Europe, we see now that hate speech has decreased, but we already see populist movements slowly dripping and scapegoating minority groups for the spread or bringing the virus. And we see existing narratives, hate narratives being recast in the virus. And I think we need to prepare, because as soon as the lockdown is eased and we we get out of our houses and we really start realizing the economical impact of the COVID-19, I think the scapegoating and the magnitude of the hate speech could quickly increase. So in this sense, I think it's now important already to start preparing on how do we create solidarity, how do we keep the solidarity that exists now and preempt hate speech that might come, and how do we engage with the communities to address it and stand against it.
Thank you very much, Menno, for your comprehensive presentation, not only on the work of the Council of Europe related to the hate speech and anti-discrimination, but also to bringing this sort of thick structure of human rights which are at stake when dealing with hate speech. I think there were two interesting things to highlight among many from your presentation. One is the number of sort of strategies that you brought in, from education through the human rights education with various manuals and other tools, to working with narratives at higher level, working with even with rumors and so on and so forth. And these are not necessarily the same, but different stuff. And we as project, I think we will try to address with thematic webinars in the upcoming months as well, so we can go even more deeper on what narratives mean, so what rumors means, and how we can actually work and use them to tackle hate speech. And the last bit, which I think should be the cornerstone of this project, is your message that you started, which is limit competition, together we are more. And given that at the EPIC project, both municipalities and non-government organizations are working together, I think that this should be at the forefront of the work of the entire project. Now, I see a number of questions have arrived. We will address later on, but before that, I will now pass over the word to the second speaker, Dariusz Grzemny, who is a youth worker and activist from Poland. He's also a trainer and consultant in the educational projects across Europe dealing with anti-discrimination and human rights education. At the European level, Darek worked for Amnesty International Secretariat in London as human rights educational advisor, as well as he was Council of Europe's educational advisor. So Darek, I will pass over to you for your intervention.
What I will be talking about is basically a little bit to talk about the practice of this comprehensive approach that Menno was talking about in his presentation. So how did we in our municipality, in our community, we involve different actors in preventing and acting against hate speech. So I will talk a bit about how we do these different elements related to education, activism, and advocacy, and how we involve different actors and cooperate together in order to bring about the change. A few things about where I come from. I come from an NGO. It's called Association for Children and Young People, CHANT. So we are working mainly with children and young people, but also with different professionals that actually work with children and young people. So cooperating with schools, different educational institutions, but also other institutions. Our main goal is to prevent and act against violence, any type of violence. And we consider hate speech violence. So that's why hate speech is one of the elements, and it's very relevant for the lives of young people. That's why we are dealing with it as well in all our activities. What we are running basically two centers. So one is the Youth Community Center, which is basically a center for young people, where young people can hang out, where we actually practice youth work. And then we also run Child Advocacy Center. The name is very unfortunate, but it comes from the, let's say, American example a little bit, but it's based on actually on Scandinavian example. The advocacy is very important, but Child Advocacy Center is the center where everybody, basically children and young people, can come in the situations when they experience violence, and they can get all the support under one roof. So there's everything there. When there is a lawyer needed, there is a lawyer. When there is a social worker needed, there is a social worker. There is therapy, there are psychologists. There is also a hearing room. So if there is a situation where there was a crime, then the court comes to us and listens to the child or to a young person, so they don't have to go to the court. So the idea was that young people and children who experience violence, they don't go from institution to institution and tell their story all the time, but rather they come to one place and they get everything under one roof. So this is what we basically do. Just to put you in the context, probably, maybe you know it, maybe not. I know that there are some Polish people in the room as well. These are some data that actually we have been using a lot when thinking about our activities. And I think that this is also a starting point for a lot of things that we did, that in order to actually respond to challenges related to hate speech, it has to be quite well researched, not only well researched on the scope of the country, but also on the local community. These are some of the statistics coming from the country. This is the statistics from Public Opinion Research Center that show the scope of the problem when it comes to hate speech and also attitudes towards refugees, migrants, and also LGBT people. So these are the main highlights that we actually took into consideration when we started our programs. And also this element saying that people in the youth, when they are in the youth, they are the biggest group actually that shows the least tolerant attitudes towards refugees. So this is something that also made us think, why is it so, and what we can actually do when working with young people, involving young people in preventing and acting against hate speech. We also did our own research. We talked to young people in basically all schools in our city. The city is called Głogów. I didn't say it. It's in the southwest of Poland. It's not a big municipality. It's 60,000 people. So just to give you an orientation, what I'm talking about. So what we got from this research as we did, it was we collected some numbers, but numbers maybe are not the most important. We also ran different focus groups and also in-depth interviews with young people. So what we got, just as a summary, is that young people experience very different forms of hate speech. This is not only hate speech online, but we also talk a lot about they also talk a lot about hate speech offline that basically happens most of the time in schools. So this is something that we got to know. We also got to know that hate speech is a widely accepted phenomenon, and it's actually confirmation of the national research on hate speech that in a way, hate speech is so common, especially in the online space, that it somehow became normalized by young people. So it's something that they even say that this is something we see every day and we don't care. So it became of a everyday life experience of young people. We also noticed that young people really have troubles in defining hate speech. I mean, there is a lot that they talk about. A lot of this is hate online. It's not really hate speech, but there are a lot of examples of hate speech, but they are not able to recognize. Then what we found out is that ignoring hate speech is the most common way of dealing with it. So it comes from, we ask them, why do you ignore? And then young people say that, first of all, as I said, they don't care. A lot of them, they don't care. Many of them said that they actually don't know what to do. They don't want to be attacked as well. So I think it's very common for a lot of research done across Europe. But also they expressed a lot of different needs in terms of learning and active. They would like to know how to react, how to recognize, how to actually talk with other people about it, especially with their peers. So this is something we also took into consideration when we were designing our programs on hate speech together with young people. Because this is not only the starting point, but also it's based on the idea that young people, because they were our main actors in what we were doing, that they have been involved in all the activities from the beginning to the end. So when we were thinking about it, how we can actually do it, we thought that in order to really properly respond to hate speech, we wanted to take this interdisciplinary approach and also multi-agency approach. So also get in touch with different institutions that actually can help us. They will have different roles, and I will talk about it, what kind of roles they had in the program. so these were the NGOs, of course, and the local authorities, schools, media, young people, and others. Others is a big group because this is these are the members of the community. This is also the prosecutor's office. This is police. A lot of institutions actually that we wanted to involve in this idea that we had. So I will go briefly a little bit, tell you what our experience was like and what we actually did, just focusing on some of the elements because this has been running already for several years. So it's difficult within 20 minutes to tell about everything. I will mainly focus on some highlights and why we thought it was important and what worked for us. I will also talk a little bit about the challenges that we also experienced, because I think it's also important to take them into account. So our idea, because the young people were the main actors in all this fight that we started, we thought together with them that maybe the best idea would be to actually involve the young people in not as only the recipients of education, but also as being educators. So that's why we started this program of peer education training. We trained, I think, around 30 young people who wanted to become peer educators. I think out of this group, there were like 21 or 2 that were very active. So basically we trained them. There was a kind of a long-term training because it was spread over 5 months. We met several times together and tried to explore different issues related to hate speech, how they see it, how we can actually talk with young people about it, and so on. So this training was like a usual training for educators. You can imagine how you do the training for educators, but it was more to prepare young people to talk to their peers. And then after that, the young people actually went to schools and they did workshops with their peers. And I think that this was, I think on one hand, we thought we have a lot of experience with doing hate speech, but this was also a very controversial topic. Talking about, in these times when we started about LGBT was not easy. It's not easy anymore. It's not easy all the time, but it was not very easy talking about refugees as well. Especially that young people, when they went to school, they couldn't be left alone in the classroom. They had to be together with a teacher. So the teacher was there also as a kind of student. But we had a lot of situations where teachers actually got involved and they said their own personal opinion. And it was not very encouraging for young people to actually run these workshops. Sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't. But I think that this is what is important in this situation is that it really worked very well. And I think that this is what young people did not expect, that they can talk to their peers about the problems and they can really open up. So we had these situations where young people were opening up. We were running this program also in countryside schools in the villages near the city over the period of 1 month. And almost after every workshop, we had young people coming to our peer educators reporting violence or hate that actually they were targeted with. So this was something that really opened up the young people to talk about it. And the school didn't know about this example. So I think that this really worked well. But we thought that it's not enough actually to talk to young people. We wanted to have this whole school approach. So also train teachers, also the staff of the school, not only teachers, but also the staff, and also meeting parents. And so that's what we did. So in every school that we were running the peer education workshops with young people, we also involved the training for teachers, which was about 6 hours training for teachers and staff. And also we tried to meet with parents. I think the last part, the parents meeting, was the most challenging. We had to use different tricks to actually attract parents, and so they come to school, they actually listen to, and they talk. But when they came, they actually had a lot of questions. They were very open meetings, like really talking in an open atmosphere, not teaching, not educating, but rather talking about what situations they're confronted with and what solutions they are looking for. So this is this part of learning that we considered a very important part of the work. Then I think it's advocacy, and advocacy is coming usually after learning. I mean, it has to be some kind of basis in order to do advocacy. We identify different problems, we identify different different elements that we thought need to change. And that's why there's actually two things that we did, and both of them were quite successful. One was this, we organized a youth meeting where we invited to this meeting not only young people, but also teachers and also representatives from our municipality. We had the mayor and also and also other people, where we actually wanted to involve people coming from different backgrounds and from different institutions to actually meet young people and talk with young people together. This was facilitated. Of course, this was not a very open meeting, but it was facilitated through different workshops and different, let's say, ways of talking together. We tried to think what is actually needed when it comes to tackle hate speech and what is needed from these different actors that we have here, the young people, teachers, NGOs, and local authorities. So this was something that we thought it's important, because very often when it comes to local authorities, there is very little chances or that municipalities, local authorities, that get in touch with young people in a kind of equal to equal basis. So because all of them were equal, all of them actually had a kind of role to play in this meeting. Another thing, I didn't put it in the slide here because we have just initiated it, and it's actually started 5 months ago. We decided that we will open, in order to really respond to the problem of violence, including hate speech, we need a proper dialogue between different institutions, local authorities, and different groups of people. That's why we initiated a monitoring group on violence, where we involved representatives from different institutions, different organizations, also youth organizations, and municipalities. So we have a group now of 30 something people coming from different organizations, institutions, schools, and also the local authorities. So we have just had a first meeting. We wanted to have another one, but the coronavirus somehow stopped us from having it. So hopefully we are going to have it soon, if not online. Then we see how we progress. We basically decided what we are going to do together, what kind of, let's say, responsibilities we all have, and how we can together monitor the situations related to violence and all what is done in the local community against violence. I think activism is something that attracts young people a lot. So that's why we did quite a lot of campaigns, which is a video campaign. We did a lot of posters. We involved young people from schools from spreading their message, like I have on the first picture. And this was something organized sometimes as a result of our workshops that we did in schools. So that the schools actually decided to do mini campaigns in their schools, but we also did ours. So I think that this is one of the campaigns that was very successful, was actually making a video together with the local television, making a video and involving people coming from different institutions, organizations, and also local authorities, like public figures, people who are known and recognized in the community. So they actually pass the message against violence and against hate speech. So we recorded it, and then it was screened on local television, and this was quite successful. Very easy to do as well. It was very easy to actually organize it. Then other activities that maybe it's important to talk about is that are involving also different people, is the stories. It's basically how we are working with young people, especially, that's involving is a very active actors in all the prevention and acting against hate speech. So the idea that young people had was actually to do to talk to their peers, to talk to their friends who they know, who actually experience hate speech or hate crimes even, because we had some stories of hate crimes. And then we put together a booklet, actually a manual that was based on the stories that young people told, how they experience hate speech, how they experience hate crimes. And then on the basis of that, together with the group of educators, we developed a manual that how to use these stories in educational processes. So how to use these stories in workshops organized by teachers at school and so on. So it's like a very practical manual that can be used by people who do education. We also did an action which is called Hate Speech and Young People. I put it like this. This was also a campaign, but it was done in all schools in the city. On one day at the same time, the young people from all schools, was not all young people, but big groups of people, some hundreds, they gathered together in one place and they wrote their stories, they wrote the kind of the understanding of hate speech. So every school was given a topic and then they worked on this topic. The topics were very simple. How do you recognize hate speech? What do you do if you are confronted with hate speech, and so on. I think it was a very important event because this was one of the few occasions that actually young people, especially from the secondary schools, they had a chance to get in contact with other young people who actually had very opposing views. So this was a very good occasion to actually talk and negotiate what we have in common, what actually we share. And on the basis of this, what young people developed, we also published a book. So it was like a collective book writing by young people. I'm looking at the time because the time is running very quickly. What we are also doing is, we have started last year, we organize open community meetings, and every community meeting is open for everybody. So everybody can come. We of course encourage mainly young people to come, but there are also not only young people coming, and every open community meeting has a topic. The topic can be anything. But we try to organize it around the topic of violence. So there's a lot of open community meetings that we were holding on hate speech. We always invite somebody to talk, and then we talk together. Some of the meetings are very popular. We had like 70, 60 people coming, sometimes 30, 25, but it's open. So this is the whole idea. And the thing that we are launching now, basically we started already, we did a kind of pilot. It's something we got Among Us Neighbors. And this is where we very closely cooperate with local municipality, with local authorities. It's together with the mayor, we organize the meetings of people. So we go from every community in the city to every community. We announce that there is a meeting. The meeting we will be talking about how do you react to violence, how do you recognize it, and so on. The mayor comes with us, so we are together with the mayor. So I think the role of the mayor is very important here. So people think it's an important thing to come. So we were holding these meetings once already, and now we want to do it in the end of the year as well. And it's really an unbelievable occasion to talk about issues that are important, including hate speech. Because what we notice after every meeting, that the number of people who are coming to our center is growing. People who are seeking help, people who are actually, who really didn't know that they can come to a place and talk about it, or because they are worried about something that is happening. So I think that this is, it plays an important role. I come back to this poster because this is what I would like to some kind of reflect on what we did so far, because these processes are still ongoing. I think that there's different roles that different actors can play, and this is something that's important, what Menno was highlighting, that in a way we are aiming at the same thing, but we should do something different, not do the same thing altogether, because this is not working. We have different capacities and so on. And I think that the NGOs have a very important role to play, because especially when they are seen as reliable in the community, they are very attractive to people, and people can come, and they will be, the organizations are recognized as a very important actor in the community. But I think local authorities have a very important role to play, not only as a money bag, because sometimes, and I think that this is something that is where the cooperation with local authorities fails, where NGOs are treating local authorities as money bags, so only providing financial support. I think it is important, but I think that what in our case was very important was this validation and recognition, so that what we do is important, and then we are supporting this in any possible ways, including, for example, mayor joining our meetings, or people from the municipality joining our meetings. But I think this also enabling and facilitating a role is very important. So for example, when we decided to do different activities in schools, and you can imagine when we did it in all schools at the same time, this was difficult to organize. We actually got the support from the municipality. So the municipality met with the headmasters, headmistresses of the school, and we had this time to talk with them as well. So I think that this is an important role to play. With schools, where young people are spending most of the time, I think they were the main partners of when it comes to all our activities that we do on prevention and action against hate speech, including all educational activities, campaigning, and also mobilizing young people for different campaigns. Media is another, and I think building a strong relationship with the media and involving media, not only as entity that does the publicity, but also as entity that has a very important role in awareness raising, is important. So what we did also in our case, we also trained the journalists, we also trained the media people, both from the local television, radio stations, and also newspapers. I think young people are, in our case, they were the main actors. You see that some of the things are repetitive, but the role is very different. Because young people, in our case, were not only the recipients, beneficiaries, but they were basically the people who shaped the whole program, and also they also took the active role in education. So they were educators themselves. And other institutions and organizations, some of them are here, I already mentioned it, police and also prosecutor's office in case we had to report different cases, and we had these cases. This is very important because then they see us as somebody who has a capacity, who is recognized in the community as an actor when it comes to preventing and acting against hate speech of any kind, any type of violence. It was I think it's a very good program, and we are running it continuously. Young people change because they grow up and there are new young people coming. It looks like it's also sweet, but it's not also sweet. It's not always very nice. I think we didn't experience very big problems. I think the biggest one that actually we had to struggle with was that while local authorities, I'm talking about mayor's office, were very open and very supportive and very important actor in all our activities, not necessarily the members of the city council were. So in one of our programs that we ran in schools, in pure education program, and in schools where young people went to school to talk about hate speech with young people, this program was also supported financially by the municipality. So we got the money from the mayor's office to do it. The problem was that two of the members of the local council, they didn't like it that we talked about LGBT. And they lodged an official complaint that we are promoting LGBT ideology, whatever it is, but we didn't know what it is. But that's what they claimed in the letter, and they actually asked us to provide lesson plans, what we talked about, and explain why we did it. And they attacked the mayor for financing LGBT and gender ideology. So this is something that we had to actually face. But because of this link and also the relationship we built with the local authorities, we actually didn't experience it so badly, because we got a lot of support from the municipality, how to reply to it, how to go about it. And the municipality was very strong about claiming that this is very important and so on. So we provided the lesson plans, but this is how it finished. But it was all over the media, local media, on the social media, and so on. And it was not problematic. The problem was that some of the members of these two members of the local council, they actually attacked two young people, two of our peer educators, on the social media, on Facebook, and so on. And they claimed that these are LGBT people going to schools and promoting their ideology. They were not LGBT people. But this was something that young people very much, let's say they suffered from it. They were attacked by other people as well on social media. So we basically what we did, we had to take care of these young people, and this was the most important what we did in this moment. So this is how this functions in our situation and in our context. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Derek. I think you brought a great variety of ways how to engage with young people and also with other agencies or stakeholder groups, but also you showed how there is no one recipe that one country or one group can use to tackle hate speech. So you need actually to try different things, from education to community meetups to campaigning and so on and so forth. So I think we open up now. We are slightly over time, but that were very interesting food for thought for the question and answer session. So the first question that arrived, I will go on the row. It's from an anonymous attendee, and it asks, in ECRI's general policy recommendation number 15 on combating hate speech, how can we cross the red line in case of an extreme manifestation? Does this definition include the violent aspects? I suppose this goes for Menno because it was in his presentation. If Menno still hears us.
Yes, I'm still here, of course. It's a good question. The ECRI general policy recommendations give some elements that should be included when we're looking into defining the criminal's threshold of the hate speech. There are a few indicators that or elements that they're adding. At the same time, it's not so narrowly specifically defined because there are a lot of national contexts to take into account. So we need the definition of hate speech and to identify what is to be considered criminal is in a wider context of legislative practice on what is discrimination, what's permissible, what isn't. So in some countries, for example, denial of Holocaust is criminalized, and in others it's not. So this has an impact on the defining hate speech and how you act on it. So you cannot see this defining hate speech and how to identify the criminal threshold. You cannot see that separate from existing national legislation on criminals, on discrimination and equality. And this is, I think, is part of the challenge. And it's also a reason, for example, why sometimes there's a need to review national legislation on discrimination and equality to actually make it to extend the grounds, for example, so that it actually addresses the needs for for appropriate hate speech definition.
Thanks, Menno. And of course, if Derek, you want to chip in, feel free to do it as well. So we have another question from another anonymous attendee. I work in an NGO mainly involved in refugees and asylum seekers integration projects on a very local level. As a case manager, social worker, how can I impact more on the prevention and reduction of hate speech in my day-to-day work?
Well, I think that what I tried to say also at the beginning of my presentation was that what we did was very contextualized. So what we did was really trying to recognize what the problem is and then talked with the people who are the most affected. In our case, they were young people, how we can approach it. So I think that this would be probably the starting point, because I don't know the answer to this question. I don't know what is the specificity of the context. So what worked in our context was this combination of different elements. So it's not only doing one thing, going and educate. I think education is important, but it's in the situation of where the hate speech is in the community. I think that we have to use these different ways of approaching different groups, different communities, and so on. And if you are working case to case, I don't know if your question is about how do you deal with the hate speech that you hear, that you experience, or you are working with the refugees on a case-to-case basis who experience these situations, because then this is then what our approach is. That's why we are running this Child Advocacy Center, which has it's not only about children. It's basically first to take care about people who experience it. I think this is for us, it was always the starting point. So we took care of these young people, providing them with support. So this is something that yeah, my answer would be.
I think then we move on with Tariq's question, which is addressed to Darek. So is any of your projects involving combating hate speech to refugees in Poland, and are the local authorities supportive to such projects?
In our case, it's not particularly only targeting refugees, because in our community, we don't have really a great number of refugees. We have a number of migrants, basically coming from different Asian countries. So, but we have other minorities that took part, especially the minority that we work with a lot in the project was the Roma community, because it's the biggest community that we have in the city. So this was the group mainly. But I know projects in Poland, especially in the area of Warsaw, where the most of the people actually, most of the refugees are in Poland. I know 2 organizations that are running 2 programs that are actually financed by the local authorities that are about hate speech against refugees and migrant population. One is about really building the system of support, and which includes also a lot of education of different groups, and also providing capacity building for different NGOs on how to work with migrants and support them. And another one is also a program that is run in schools where young people are actually educated, where there are workshops for young people on hate speech, especially targeting refugees and migrants. So I know that these projects exist, and I know that they are supported by the municipality, and one of them actually is the initiative coming from the local authorities. So I can provide you later with the links if you want, but I'm afraid it will be all in Polish. So this might be difficult to, if you don't speak the language.
Can I add something?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Yes. Sorry, I was disconnected very shortly, so I might be mentioned, but I think there are a lot of interesting examples on the Intercultural Cities website, because it's started from the perspective of migrants and refugees, and lots of local cities have been challenged on how do you address integration in these kind of contexts. So there's many case examples on the website on how different cities have addressed this. And I think part of the success was also to do a proper mapping or analysis at the start. So actually engaging with the community, both the host community and the migrant community, on what are the challenges that they face, and working from there. This is a trust building exercise, of course, and a dialogue building exercise, but it also gave a lot of rich feedback on where the entry points to start developing your interventions. And that could be that you need to work with the migrant community, it could be that you need to work with the host community, or with both, etc. So there's a lot of ways of looking at it, and there are many examples on that website to look into.
Thank you, Menno. We have a remark submitted by Jorge Mouro, who sort of reference to a sentence of Antonio Guterres, UN Secretary General, where he says, "We must say no to hate speech, xenophobia, reject the forces of polarization, nationalism, protectionism." And you can see the full address of Jorge, with whom I agree, and he raises the importance of education and training initiatives which targets children, local community organization, local authorities. So we have another question by Stefania. So thank you for your intervention. It's very interesting. I'm also a trainer, and with my cooperative, I work with young people in schools and communities. Once the young people realize what is hate speech, they understand that they are a target too. How can you handle dangerous situations? For example, people start crying or they have strong reactions. Do you have a psychologist in your team?
Yes, we do. We do have 2 psychologists and 2 psychotherapists. So and they are available for young people anytime. I mean, I think that the thing is, in our case, when we were working in schools, when young people were coming and actually were reporting or talking about their experiences, we tried also to look for or use our networks of support. So these young, because they were not necessarily coming from our city, they were coming from the countryside. So we looked for this network of support who can support these young people. And sometimes it works. Sometimes we actually had to help the young people to come and to get support in our organization. So this is what we what we did. When it happens in our city, it's easier. So it's something that we immediately react to, and then we provide support. So this is something that, but we thought that if we want, if support is one of the activity that is needed when it comes to hate speech, and we thought it is, so then we had to provide it. So that's why we had the group of psychologists and psychotherapists as well.
Yeah, and if I may add, I think, for example, in Georgia, what we learned is that you have community workers or youth workers that know how to deal with sensitive issues and emotions. But what they sometimes don't know is the language. So what's human rights language, or what's an inclusive language, or how to not re-emphasize stereotypes. So in that sense, this dialogue between the minority group and the youth worker was very useful. So doing joint trainings, for example, was very good because they understood what is acceptable language for the minority group, etc. And that made the youth worker have a bigger toolkit to actually do his or her work. So I think we learned that youth workers or social workers or community workers do have the capacity to deal with emotional or difficult issues, but you can support them with a bit of extra training.
What we did as well when we were training our peer educators, mind that they were young people, so there were some of them were 15, 16. We also had a big bit of the training on actually handling difficult situations, or handling situations where people can really say things that may be difficult for them to deal with. So we actually trained them in supporting, in this first line support, and this worked very well. Actually, they were able to provide this kind of peer support first, and then they knew what to do, that they had to call us, that we need to come, or that how to provide people with contacts where they should go, and so on. So this was something that was also important. So not to leave the young people to wait until they can come to our organization and get the proper support.
Thank you, Derek. I see that there are no more questions, and I see also the time is flying. We are about 30 minutes over it. So I think we close it here for this time. Thank you so much for your interventions. I think also that I hope that this webinar sort of served a little bit to not only understand better the hate speech problem, but also look at it from the institutional perspective, what Council of Europe is doing, the definitions and the human rights perspective, as well as from the grassroots level, and what efforts it takes to build a partnership, to build a network and work with young people to tackle hate speech. So as I remarked before, there is no recipe to tackle hate speech. It involves various things, and also this should be done together, because together we are more, as Menno said. After the webinar, we will send also the slides of both Menno and Derek. And together with that, you will receive a feedback form where we would like to hear more also what type of webinars you would like in the upcoming months, so we can also respond to your needs. And with that, thanks to Dolinda and to Patricia again for supporting and making this possible. And hope to see you again next time in the next webinar. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.